So students, in the last class, we looked at balance of payments, right? And we not only talked about the different components of balance of payments, we also looked at how is the balance of payments calculated, right? Now, let me repeat this, right? In the last class, we completed our discussion about what are the different components of balance of payments, like what are the three accounts: current account, capital account, and financial account. And then we talked about each one of these in detail, like what type of transactions are recorded in each account. And towards the end of our yesterday's class, we also looked at how to calculate the balance of payments. Now, what I told you and what we saw through the calculation in yesterday's class was that current account, first of all, you calculate the current account balance, right? And current account balance is made up of four subsections, right? So that would depend how much was your exports and imports of goods, which is recorded in trade in goods. Then there's another subsection that is trade in services. So you look at how much is the import and export of services, and then you have income, and then you have current transfers, right? So these were the four subsections of current account. Easy, students, is this simple? Income and current transfers, right? Okay, now moving forward, when we add up the balance of each of these four sections, right, we will get to find out the balance on the current account, right? So think about this. If there is positive net exports of, right? So I'm now just writing the net exports. Students, are you getting me? So let's say there is a net exports of $10 million. This means that Pakistan's export exceeded its imports by 10 million. And if trade and services, we had a deficit of, let's say, 15 million. This means that our imports of services were $15 million more compared to our exports. Students, are you following me or not? Similarly, on the income section, again, if we had a deficit of, let's say, 7 million, right? This means that the income that foreigners earn on our assets was greater than the income that our nationals earned on foreign held assets. So that is again overall a deficit on the income, right? And lastly, in the current transfers, let's say, is a positive of $2 million. This means that we received more in remittances, 2 million more in remittances and aid from other countries compared to how much we paid to other countries, right? So all you have to do is to add up the values of these four subsections. So 10 minus 15 minus 7 plus 2. How much does that give? That gives you 12, negative 10 million. Yes or no? That gives you negative $10 million. Am I right? Did I do the calculation correctly? Because 15 and 7 is 22. 22 minus 12 should be right, negative 10, right? Are we good? So it's a deficit. So this negative sign, or if you want to remove the negative sign, you may, but then you would have to specify that this is a deficit. So if you keep it with a negative sign, this means a deficit, or else you can remove the negative sign and you can just add the word deficit next to it, right? So that we know that outflows were greater than the inflows. Deficit. Outflows were greater than the inflows, right? Students, are you clear on this? Now, if there is, now what we will do in today's class, now this is very important. First of all, we will define what is balance of payments disequilibrium. This is a new word, new term that we are about to discuss. Balance of payments disequilibrium. Balance of payment disequilibrium. So let me first disequilibrium. Okay, now first of all, let me define this term and then I'll tell you why is that important. Okay, equilibrium. Okay, we are defining disequilibriums. Automatically, you will understand about what is disequilibrium. Oh, sorry, equilibrium, right? Have a look at this. Is when there is constant. What is balance of payment disequilibrium? This is the definition I'm writing. Right, is when there is constant surplus or deficit on balance of payments, that is known as balance of payments disequilibrium. And when there is a constant surplus or deficit on the BOP, which is balance of payments, that is known as deficit. Sorry, that is known as disequilibrium. Right? Now let's break this down. That is known as disequilibrium. Okay, now what is the definition of it? The definition says that what is balance of payments disequilibrium? Balance of payment disequilibrium is when there is a constant, now this is a very key word here, constant surplus or deficit on the BOP that is known as disequilibrium. Now think about this. If a country is constantly having a surplus on the current account, which means that this value will be positive, or if a country is constantly having a deficit, which means that outflows are always higher than inflows, then that is what a disequilibrium is, right? And to answer your question there, Bob, so equilibrium on balance of payment is when there are periods of surplus and deficits. So when a country has surplus, mix of surplus and deficit on its balance of payment, that is considered to be a good situation, that is considered to be in equilibrium. But when it is not like that, and either a country is constantly facing a surplus or a country is constantly facing a deficit on its BOP, that is what is defined as disequilibrium. Now, first thing I want you to ask, you that, is everyone clear on this? Up to this part, is this clear? So do you guys know when I say that what is balance of payment disequilibrium, would you be able to identify? So you should remember that disequilibrium means exactly like either a country is constantly, what does constant mean? Like year after year. So if year after year a country is facing surplus, or similarly if year after year a country is facing deficit on its balance of payment, then that is a disequilibrium. On the other hand, if there are few periods, few years of surplus and then a few years of deficit, or like, mix and match, right? Then that is equilibrium, meaning it's a good situation to be in, right? Okay, now this being said, now if let's say we are looking at this country's balance of payment, let's say this is for Pakistan, and on the current account, these were the balances, right? On the trade in goods, you had a surplus of $10 million. On trade in services, you had a deficit of $15 million. On income, you had a deficit of $7 million. And on current transfers, you had a surplus of $2 million. Overall, it gave you a deficit of $10 million. Now, the thing that is important over here, that there is a deficit. Now, if we have to identify, and by the way, if I have to tell you, Pakistan faces persistent deficit on its current account. Pakistan faces persistent deficit on its current account, which means it's basically a disequilibrium that we face. We face constant deficit. And what does that mean? We know by definition, deficit means that outflows were greater than the inflows. Now we'll break the situation down and we'll talk about that if that is happening with the country, and in this case it's Pakistan, how can we improve this situation, or what is going wrong and how can we improve this situation? Students, are you following me over here? Right? Let me explain you one more time. Current account deficit is something that Pakistan faces. There are a lot of other developing countries that also face current account deficit, and Pakistan is one of them. This is how you can think about it. Now, if Pakistan has faced persistent deficit in its current account, like constant year after year, deficit on its current account. So we will discuss two things. A, why is that happening? B, what can be done to improve this situation? A, why is this happening? And B, what can be done to improve the situation? So who can answer the A part? Why is this happening? Why is this happening? Like obvious explanation I want. I don't expect you to know Pakistan trade policies. I don't expect you to know everything about Pakistan's trade, but just looking at the values, this is my question. Looking at the values, what can you infer? Looking at the values, what can you tell? Where are we struggling? Where are we struggling? Come on, students, this should be easy. Where are we struggling? We are struggling on, like, what's the question mark about, Arbab? What do you mean? Developing country? What do you mean by this? Right, so where are we struggling? Students, come on, it's written right in front of you. So in trade and services, if you look at this, right, and in the income section, if you look at this, right, so our outflows, our imports were greater than our exports, which can include reasons like more people travel outside Pakistan for tourism compared to the number of people who come to Pakistan for tourism. Students, are you getting me or not? So if you have a deficit on the services section, what is this showing us? This shows that more Pakistani students are going abroad to study compared to what compared to students, foreign students who are coming to Pakistan for study. That could be one possible explanation. Another possible explanation for a deficit for trade and services is that more people are going out of Pakistan for tourism compared to people coming in Pakistan for tourism. Are you guys getting me or not? Or right, we're talking about Abdul Rahim, we're talking about balance of payments disequilibrium. So look at the definition. Balance of payment disequilibrium is when there is a constant, which means year after year. When there's a constant surplus or deficit on the balance of payment, that is known as disequilibrium. Now, I have given you some values in front of you, right? For a certain country, let's assume it's Pakistan. Now we are looking at if this is a deficit for Pakistan's current account. So what are possible explanation for this? What are possible explanations for this? So if where is the deficit coming from? So deficit, as you can see from the calculations here, so deficit is coming from trade and services and deficit is coming from income section. Now, what could be the possible explanations for that, right? So first one we were talking about over here, trade and services. What do we record in trade and services? Import and export of services. So what does that include? That includes, education services, healthcare services, tourism, and all these different things. So if we have a deficit on the trade and services, this means that more Pakistanis are traveling abroad every year for tourism, for education, compared to the number of students who travel to Pakistan for tourism. Are you getting me? That is one reason why there's deficit on the trade and services. Similarly, for the income section, why do we have a deficit on the income section? Because more income is, paid more income is paid to foreigners on local held assets compared to what Pakistanis earn on foreign held assets. Are you getting me or not? So just think about exactly what we discussed yesterday. More foreign working, exactly. So more foreigners are either working in Pakistan or perhaps more, more income is, so income includes foreign held assets, right? So what you're talking about, that would be a remittance, right? Arba? So remittance would be part of current transfers. Remittance is a unilateral transfer that would be part of current transfers. But what do we include in the income section? So that includes the profit that you earn from your businesses or the profit that you earn on the assets, financial assets like bank accounts and stock exchange. So if there is a deficit on the income section, this means that foreigners are earning more income on Pakistani held assets compared to what Pakistanis are earning on foreign held assets, right? And that can also be looked by the fact that more multinational companies are operating in Pakistan, KFC, McDonald's, Shell. All these companies are not Pakistani brands, these are international brands. So whatever profit they make would be recorded as debit entry into the income section because that is technically outflow from Pakistan. Easy? Is this making sense, students? This is simple. Right? So now coming to the idea, let's try to generalize this thing. When a country is constantly facing a deficit on its when a country is constantly facing a deficit on its current account, what are problem areas? What problem can we, sense? What problem can we sense from that, right? So the problem that we can sense from that is that the country's trading position is not very amazing. Right, Arbab, is this clear? Preet, are you also following me? If a country is constantly facing a deficit on its current account, so what can we infer from that? That is basically simply what I'm asking. Facing a deficit on its current account, then what could be possible explanations for that? be nations for that. Okay, now if this is clear, we'll move on, right? So the first thing that we can understand, very good. So the first thing that we can understand is that the country, because what are the two most important components of current account? What are the two most important components of current account? I did tell you, right? That the biggest value in any country's current account comprises of trade in goods and trade in services. So these two components out of the four components that we were just looking at are the most important ones because they have more value transactions. They have more valuable transactions, right? And this is true for every country, right? Because obviously nowadays international trade has become so common and so prevalent that every country in the world engages in international trade, right? So if Pakistan or if any other country is constantly facing, right, that is the question we are looking at. If a country is constantly facing a deficit on its current account, then what could be the possible explanations for that, right? So that would show, the first thing that you have to think about is that they are performing bad on international trade. That country is struggling on international trade. Why? Because its exports are less compared to its imports. Its exports of goods and services is less compared to its imports, right? Right. So explanation A would be, one explanation would be poor performance on international trade. And what could be the reasons for that? What could be the reasons for that? Quickly, students, hurry up. So why is Pakistan's value of exports every year is less than the value of its imports? Any guesses, any idea? Right. So the simple explanation would be that, yeah, right? That is, think about the students, what are the goods that we export? And this is not only true for Pakistan, this is also true for a lot of other developing countries. The problem is that the goods that we export are low value goods compared to the goods that we import. Now listen to me very carefully. We are talking about, if a country is constantly facing a deficit on its current account, what are the possible explanations? And Pakistan meets falls in this category. And this is mainly for a lot of developing countries, right? For a lot of developing countries, this is true, right? Except for, I guess, India and China, right? And Brazil as well, right? So the reason is, right, exactly, what products we export are low value goods compared to the goods that we import. Those are more expensive, right? Couldn't produce goods that we need and we have to import. Exactly. Excellent, right, Aslam? So Pakistan is doing poorly on its international trade. Reason being, what are our main exports? Agriculture, sports equipment, surgical instruments. But still, these products are not as valuable as the things that we import. You would have an idea. If you don't, I can, help you know how much a foreign university costs. So when a typical or when an average student from Pakistan goes to a foreign university to study, that is import of service. Students who are taking Cambridge exams in Pakistan, what we're studying for right now, is also an import of service, because this money technically is going to UK, which is not in, like, it's going to Cambridge University, which is not in Pakistan, right? Right, some very expensive universities. You have done your homework. By the way, that reminds me, Bob, I'm really sorry. I saw your comment on that live session that we were having. I'll reply back to that comment. And secondly, in the upcoming sessions, inshallah, we will talk more about and all that, right? Exactly. So some very expensive universities per year can cost you $80,000, and some can cost you approximately $40,000 to $50,000 and so on, right? So that's insane amounts of money, especially when you convert in Pakistani rupees, right? This being said, so poor performance on international trade. So the reason for that we've already discussed: low value goods export and more value goods import. Low value goods exported, goods and services, even for services, right? So think about this. If a typical American or if anyone from the outside of Pakistan comes for tourism, we will not be able to charge them a lot, or that is not something very expensive. But when a student goes from one country to study in a foreign country, then that would be very expensive, right? Low value goods and services exported, imported, and high value imported. Right? Easy. Okay. Now, this being said, imported. Sorry about the space thing. Okay. Any other thing coming to your mind? Because students think, right? Okay. So you don't support that? Aslam, you don't support that? I mean, think about this. I don't know. So I can't really say if that's a good idea, that's not a good idea to study abroad. Whether that really improves your learning or does that not, that's a different debate. But I mean, interesting. ठीक है जी स्टूडेंट्स, ये बात समझ में आ गई? ठीक है, अच्छा इसके अलावा और क्या रीजंस हो सकते हैं? What can be some other reasons, right, for deficit on the current account? Let's quickly complete this and then move on to the next point. Another reason for a deficit on the current account, ये जो सबसे major reason है, this is a major reason, right? So let me put it in capitals, right? So this is the major reason why there is deficit on developing countries' current account, because they're not doing very well on their trade, and the reason being that the goods that they're exporting are not very valuable, and the things that they're importing, oil, military equipment, capital goods, cars, consumer electronics. So these are all the products that Pakistan imports and a lot of other country imports. So these products are definitely more value added compared to products like we export, agriculture, surgical instruments, and so on, right? Easy, can we move on? Very high exchange rate. I mean, loans part, I'll come to it, Abdul Rahim. Very high exchange rate, Preet. I mean, yes, you can say that, but that only affects when you have, now listen to this very carefully. So Preet is saying if very high interest rate, sorry, very poor, weak exchange rate could be the reason for that. So the answer to that is yes, but that only affects us when there is inelastic demand. So very weak exchange rate for Pakistan against these other countries can be a reason, given that the import of goods has inelastic demand, which means that we have to import no matter what. So think about this. If Pakistan's exchange rate is depreciating against UAE or Saudi or whatever, right? Now, and these are the countries we are importing our oil from, then we have to import that oil no matter what, how much weak our exchange rate gets. So that is definitely a huge burden on our, right? What happens when a country increases interest rates like Pakistan did? Interest rates. Effect on what? So I mean, that can have multiple effects. So on one end, this can encourage savings. Aggregate demand you're talking about, right? So normally economic activity reduces. So a major connection between interest rates and aggregate demand, which is basically the demand from an economy, right? So that is higher the interest rates, lower economic activity. So your aggregate demand will shift to the left when interest rates are higher, because consumption would be low, less companies and businesses would want to borrow money, investment is also decreasing, so that would be a leftward shift. Economy, like how can we connect it to our syllabus? Right. Just a second. This is getting confusing. Who wrote what? Right. So whose question? Abdul Rahim's question was that. Right, Arbab, so I answered your question. Interest rates, if interest rates increase, aggregate demand decreases, aggregate demand will shift to the left, right? Because people are borrowing less and there would be less consumption because people will be encouraged to save more, right? Economy, like, I mean, what effect it has on the economy? I mean, it can have multiple effects. So it's not that you have to see. So I've already explained. So on a global level, on the, not on, sorry, my bad, on the national level, on the country level, when interest rates are increasing, so this is known as contractionary monetary policy. This means that now people would borrow less. That is known as contractionary monetary policy. People would borrow less and people would save more. So that decreases the economic activity and your GDP would fall. But that also helps you to control inflation. Contractionary monetary policy, which means higher interest rate, would also help you to control inflation. So that is a simple answer to that. But why, how are interest rates relevant over here? How are interest rates relevant over here? Now, what's your comment? If there's a limited supply of good which cannot be increased if demand increases, so in that case, the price may increase and leading to reduced exports by the high price. So it can also cause disequilibrium in BOP. If there's a limited supply of a good, okay, which cannot be increased if demand increases, so in that case, the price increase may increase and leading to reduced exports by the high price. So that it can also cause disequilibrium balance of payments. Right. Yeah. Yeah. But where are you bringing this from? The answer to that, basically in this statement, Preet, you have two things mentioned. So you're not only talking about, so when you say there's a limited supply of a good, so that can be thought of as oil, right? So petroleum in the world has limited supply. And if the demand is going up, the prices will go up, right? This is how it works. So in that case, the price increase leading to increased, right, import, that totally would cause balance of payment disequilibrium. But the second part that you've said, reduced exports, right? So think about this. Factors that affect your exports and imports can be different. Students, factors that can affect your exports and imports can be different, right? So think about this. Let's not try to complicate it more than what it is, right? Weak exchange rate and inelastic demand for imports. So that could be another reason. So I would want to put it down like this. Did you guys get the second part? This second point? So Pakistan already has weaker exchange rate against a lot of these currencies. Weak exchange rate and inelastic demand for imports, right? So what is inelastic? Anything that you have to import no matter how much higher the prices, and inelastic demand for imports. So if Pakistan has to import oil because we don't have any substitute, right? We need that, and inelastic demand for imports, then even if it's getting expensive, we'll do that. Similarly, we import all the military equipment, right? Most of the military equipment is imported in Pakistan. So that means that even if, you know, F-16s and all the other technology is getting expensive, we'll still import that. And that also puts pressure on our current account, and that puts our current account in a deficit. And that is another reason why we have deficit on our current account. Does this make sense, students? Right, right. Yeah, that's correct. Definitely, definitely. Another thing. Okay, I get it. I get it what you're saying. Okay. Another reason for, you know, deficit on the current account is, yeah. Now let's put it down like this. Preet, that's absolutely correct. High rate of inflation. So think now, listen to this very carefully. High rate of inflation. So if Pakistan's rate of inflation is higher in the region, right? So if Pakistan's rate of inflation is higher compared to other countries, right? So let's say Pakistan exports cotton, and let's say Thailand or Malaysia, I don't think so Malaysia, but Thailand also exports, or Vietnam also exports cotton. Now, if Pakistan's rate of inflation is higher than that of Thailand or Vietnam, then our products will become less price competitive. Our products will become less price competitive because think about from the importer's point of view. So country that is importing will find Pakistani products becoming more expensive or becoming expensive at a faster rate compared to, you know, Thailand products or Vietnamese products, right? So they will prefer to buy from countries where it's cheaper. Students, are you getting me? Right? So now let's try to sum this up. Let's try to sum this up and then move forward, right? I mean, price speculators, I think Preet, you wanted to say exchange rate. Because what do you mean when you say price speculators? You also make the situation worse. Right. Okay. So students, have a look at this. So if there's anything that is okay, get it. If there's any confusion, I'll explain you in tomorrow's class as well. But let's try to put everything in perspective. Now listen to this very carefully. Current account is one of the three accounts. Right now, we talked about first thing that we started our class with was that what is balance of payment disequilibrium? Now, balance of payment disequilibrium is when there's a constant surplus or there's a constant deficit. When there's a constant surplus or there's a constant deficit on a country's balance of payments, that is known as disequilibrium, which means that it is a bad situation to be in. So countries want to avoid that. Now, out of surplus and deficit, which one is, more problematic? So if you have to talk about whether constant surplus is more problematic or whether constant deficit is more problematic, every economist would say that deficit is more problematic because there are more cash outflows, less cash inflows, and your currency is constantly getting weaker and weaker and weaker. And you also need to take loan. So to overcome your deficit, we'll talk about this, you have to take a loan from IMF. And that is what Pakistan has been doing over the past few years. To finance your deficit, you have to take loans from IMF. Are you getting me or not? Now, first thing that we were talking about is what are the possible reasons why we are facing that deficit on the current account. Now, as I said, the two most important components within current account is trade in goods, which records your exports and imports of goods, and trade in services, which records your exports and imports of services. Now, what could be possible reason why we are facing deficit? First one, we have already clearly identified that the goods that you are exporting is low value added compared to goods that you are importing. So we import more expensive products and export less expensive products. I've given you examples. Another reason could be that we have weak exchange rate and inelastic demand for imports. These are all the goods. Think about it. So if Pakistan have to import military equipment, that has inelastic demand. So even if that gets expensive, we'll still import it. And what makes it worse? Our exchange rate depreciating against dollars. So if our exchange rate against dollars depreciating, and that is something for a good like aircraft or military equipment that we have to import anyways, so that will make our current account go more in deficit. Students, are you following me or not? Because if this would have been more elastic, then it means that we have substitutes, right? But if we don't have substitutes, then we have to import it no matter what, and weaker exchange rate makes it worse. And then comes in the high rate of inflation. So if our country's rate of inflation is higher than our, than other countries, right? As I was giving you the example, Pakistan exports cotton, Thailand, Vietnam also exports cotton. But if the rate of inflation in Pakistan is more, our products will become our products will be less price competitive. So our products will be becoming more expensive over time, which will discourage people to buy from us, Students, is this simple? Is this clear? This makes sense, right? So these were the factors that cause, and now there was a comment, right? Also, right. Preet, so what do you mean by speculators who are speculating on the exchange rate? Okay. Higher price. Makes right. Economy will lead to deficit. Yeah, I get it. Yeah, that's correct. Right. True. That's correct. Preet, what you said. Exactly. So prices are a major factor that determine how much will be your exports. So if your products are not very price competitive, they will lose their competitiveness, and therefore there will be less demand, and therefore there will be less demand for there would be less demand for your products, exports, right? Right? Easy, simple. Is this good, students? Okay. Now, this being said, let's move on and talk about what are the factors that cause a deficit on the capital account, right? So in fact, for the capital account and the financial account, there's quite of an overlap. So we'll quickly, in fact, discuss both of these two together. Now, the next thing that we're about to discuss, so just like we discussed that what are some possible reasons why there can be a deficit on the current account, now we are moving forward and we're looking at and discussing what are some possible reasons that there is a deficit on your capital or financial account, right? Easy. Okay, now let's have a look at this. Okay, now think about this. So capital account, capital and financial account deficit. Capital and financial account deficit. Okay, now think about this. If you think about the financial account, if we have more money, listen to this carefully. What does financial account records? Financial account records two types of investments. Direct investment, which means directly coming to a business and opening your business over there. And the second one is portfolio investment, which means investing in their stock exchange or in their bank account, right? So if we have a deficit on the financial account, this shows that more of Pakistanis are investing in foreign countries compared to what foreigners are investing in Pakistan. How many of you are getting me over here? Right? So if we have a deficit on our financial account, this means that more of Pakistanis are investing in foreign, more of Pakistanis are investing in foreign countries compared to what foreigners are investing in Pakistan. Now, what could be some possible reasons for that? What could be some possible reasons for that? Yeah, what do you think? So what could be some possible reasons why more Pakistanis are investing abroad and less foreigners are investing in Pakistan? Come on, shouldn't be that difficult. Right. More profits. Okay. Okay. That could be definitely one reason. Profits, more investing. No, that is happening. That is happening. That's why you have a deficit on your, that thing now. But what is the reason for that? But what is the reason for that? No, interest rates. I mean, think about this. Interest rate portfolio investment, yeah. For portfolio investment, who said that? Arbab, yes. For portfolio investment, yes. Higher interest rates would definitely be helpful, right? Higher interest rates would definitely be helpful. But higher interest rates, if Pakistan has or other countries have higher interest rates, then obviously Pakistanis would prefer to put their money in a foreign country, right? But another thing that you have to talk about, higher interest rates, right? Another thing that you need to talk about is your that how much stable is a country? How much stable is a country, right? So if a country is more stable, then that is where the countries will, that is where the investors will put their or invest in, right? So if Pakistani country is not very stable in different sense, like economic stability is one of them, political stability could be another one, growth expectation of a country is another very important factor, right? So these are generally the reasons that affect your direct investment. So let's in fact divide it like this. So you will have direct investment and indirect investment, right? So direct investment and indirect investment, right? Direct investment and indirect investment. Right? Okay, so right, yeah. Okay, so direct investment and indirect investment. Have a look at this.